St. Augustine. Setting at St. Augustine. The city of St. Augustine sits on the sunny east coast of Florida. It is the oldest continuously lived-in settlement of European and African origin in the United States. Pedro Menendez de Aviles founded Augustine in September of 1565, 42 years before the English founded Jamestown in 1607. Menendez named the city after the Catholic Saint Augustine, who was the patron saint of his hometown in Spain. 2 months earlier, Menendez had left Spain with a group of sailors and enslaved and free African people, including women and children. 600 of them made it to the shores of Florida. The settlers of St. Augustine struggled to provide food for themselves. The Timucua people, a local indigenous tribe, gave food and helped the colonists. Some of the Spanish men married Timucua women. St. Augustine grew into a busy town. Its residents soon included Spanish colonizers, indigenous people, mostly women who had married colonists and become Catholic, African people, both free and enslaved, and Germans. The Timucua people. The Timucua people lived in current-day Georgia and northern Florida. When European settlers arrived in 15th, there were around 200,000 Timucua people living on the land. However, European forces and diseases killed Timucua people. By the 18th, there were no Timucua left. Scholars study artifacts left by Timucuan people who learn more about them, since there are none left to tell their own stories. The relationship between settlers and Timucua people began on friendly terms, but soon broke down. The Spanish brought disease that killed many indigenous people, sometimes entire tribes. The Timucua people began to attack the Spanish settlement to force them away. The city had conflicts with other European settlers as well. Pedro Menendez was sent by Spain to force out French colonies who had settled in the area a year earlier. In 1564, the settlement Fort Caroline was up the coast from St. Augustine, near present-day Jacksonville. But like other European countries, Spain wanted Florida for its own, since Spain was a Catholic country. Menendez spared the French Catholics there, but Marcus the French Protestants. Drake attack. Sir Francis Drake was an English sailor, colonizer, and trader of enslaved people. In 1585, Queen Elizabeth sent him to attack Spanish forces in St. Augustine. Conflicts were rising between Protestant England and Catholic Spain. The nephew of Pedro Menendez was now the Spanish government of St. Augustine. He had been warned that Drake was off the coast of Florida with 23 ships and 2,000 men. The Spanish government had fewer than 100 soldiers, so he can order the residents out of the city. Then, when Drake and his soldiers arrived in St. Augustine, it was empty. Many residents of the town were hiding in the woods nearby. Menendez led a small skirmish between his forces and the British. Still, Drake took over St. Augustine. At that time, the buildings were mostly made of wood and clay. This made them easy to burn down. Drake burned buildings, the surrounding area, and took anything of value. He didn't burn down a nearby Timucua village, however. He wanted the indigenous people to be united with the British in later conflict. After the town was looted and burned, Drake and his men left. The Spanish returned to rebuild, mostly with wood and thatch. In March of 1599, another fire burned through the town. That September, a hurricane caused severe flood damage. The future of St. Augustine was not looking bright. Changing hands. In 1602, Spain tried to decide the fate of St. Augustine. Should Spain keep it, move it, abandon it? The King of Spain decided to keep it where it was. In time, Spanish leaders gave money to build Castillo de San Marcos, and building began in 1672. This stone fort would help the city defense. Still, for much of the 16th, St. Augustine continued to be poor, isolated, and ignored by the Spanish crown, which was fighting various wars in Europe. Shipwrecks sometimes stopped aid and supplies from reaching the town. Indigenous uprisings, severe disease, and pirate attack took their toll on the town and its people. Lastly, the English posed a growing threat. The Spanish controlled Florida, but the British controlled colonies to the north. Spain wanted to make things difficult for Britain, so they created a safe place for certain enslaved people. When escapees made it to St. Augustine, the Spanish governor let them stay as free people if they promised to be loyal to Spain. In 1738, the governor founded a community called Moors north of St. Augustine for certain enslaved and free black people. British attacks against St. Augustine continued. Spain joined the 7 Years' War in Europe in 1754 to 1763 on the side of France against England. When that war ended, the Treaty of Paris gave England Florida in exchange for Cuba, and many Spanish residents left Florida and moved there. The British ruled Florida until 1783, when the Second Treaty of Paris was signed and England recognized the United States as a country. The United States gained control of Florida in 1819, and it became a state in 1845. 16 years later, it joined the Civil War on the Confederate side. Lincolnville. During the Civil War, many black Union soldiers came from the Moose community. Some settlers in St. Augustine after the war, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863. It freed thousands of enslaved people in Confederate states. On January 1st, 1863, more than 670 enslaved people gathered in a vacant lot later named Liberation Lot. These liberated people founded the neighborhood of Lincolnville, named after the president. By the 1880s, many black residents were property owners who had built their own homes, businesses, and churches. When restrictive voting laws and other policies took right away from black citizens. In 1991, the Lincolnville History District was added to the National Register of Historic Places to honor the importance of this historical black neighborhood. 20 years after the Civil War ended, a man named Henry Flagler worked to turn St. Augustine into a vacation site for wealthy Americans. Flagler built many hotels in the city. His railroad company connected St. Augustine to cities on the East Coast. This brought opportunity and political activity. From 1963 to 1964, the city was the site of the St. Augustine movement. Many people were arrested as they protested segregation. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spent time there in an effort to pass the Civil Rights Act. St. Augustine today. St. Augustine celebrated his 450th birthday in 2015. The celebration gave residents and visitors a chance to celebrate the rich history of St. Augustine with parties all year long. Architecture in St. Augustine. St. Augustine has a street pattern and architecture that reflect its Spanish origin. The late 18th brought ornate architecture, and many buildings were specially designed and constructed. These buildings added to the charm of the city, which in turn attracted more visitors. Today, however, the Atlantic Ocean regularly floods the city, threatening the historic buildings. These floods are becoming worse and more frequent as sea level rise. The many cultural influence of the city can be seen in the buildings, food, and people. Today, St. Augustine is a popular place to vacation. Tourists can walk through sites like Castello de San Marcos or visit museums. They can spend time on the beach and admire the city's beautiful buildings. Whenever you go, St. Augustine is filled with history.